I'm Dana, and today we're making a little bit of a part 2 to the video that I made that I'll link here. And that one was sort of just a big overview of like, my parents were weird, and I think it's because they were most probably autistic, because autism tends to run in families and be, is it hereditary? Is that the term? Great start to the video, I know my words. But yeah, so a lot of you were interested in it, a lot of you seem to have similar experiences. And from the comments, a lot of us were talking about my dad, because I spoke more about my dad in the video. I have a whole thing of like, I don't want to share other people's stories because I want to talk about my experiences, and it's not up to me to talk about other people's. But my dad's been dead for 8 years, and if I don't tell his story, then there's not going to be any story there. And also it's what happened to me, and it's a whole thing, and I want to talk about it now. And I think a lot of you wanted me to and will find it useful, because I was talking about my dad a lot in the comments with you guys. So that's the video, we're gonna get into it. I don't know how much context to include to everything because I'm autistic, so this is probably going to be pretty rambly and include a whole bunch of information about my dad that you didn't need to know. So to begin with, he was half Icelandic and half Danish, grew up in Denmark, joined the Navy/military, I'm not 100% sure, and ended up in the UK. I don't know if it's a thing with like the parents of autistic people specifically, or if it's like a Scandinavian thing, but I've known like many people that just like do not know shit about their dad, and I'm sort of one of them. Like, he told us a lot of stories that are very obviously over exaggerations and not true, and not things that actually happened. And I think it's one of those where like there's truth in them, but my dad was a bit of a storyteller, and he was, I think, autistic. So I don't really know much about my dad's life before I remember him being my dad, you know? I have gotten some like photo albums and some stuff that he wrote and things like that have like told me a little bit more after he died, but like I really don't know an awful lot. But as with, I think, a lot of autistic people, and especially undiagnosed autistic people, he had a lot of jobs. He jumped from job to job, you know, like I say, he was in the Navy/military, he was working on a fishing boat at one point that him and his friend had bought. When he was in the UK, he was a taxi driver, he was a fruit and veg van salesman, he was selling VHS tapes out of a van at one point, he ended up working with social services, he taught English in Denmark at one point. Like, he had a lot of different jobs and he didn't like them. This is where I really am like, oh, I see the autism like so clearly, and I see myself there, and like it's only the last few months that I've like sort of put it all together and been like, oh, I see and I understand so much more now. Because he didn't enjoy the work that he worked for social services for the majority of my childhood, and even though I was like very young, I could very much pick up on like, he hates this. He hates the way that he's told to look after people. He's not being able to like offer the care that he thinks is appropriate for people. He doesn't get on with colleagues. He's constantly like butting heads with people because he's got his opinions and thinks he knows what's right, and they disagree. You know, I think it was a very undiagnosed autistic experience of work life. And it meant that he was very much like, I don't want to work, I want to be self-employed. And again, I think that's something that a lot of autistic people eventually turn to, because we can't keep up with like everything that has to be done in jobs, and we can't keep up with the social aspects of them, which he really struggled with. Like, I remember so many rants about his co-workers, and I'd sit there listen and be like, it doesn't sound like that big a deal. But to him it was, and that's fair. So fairly early on in my childhood, he set up a business. You can totally still find shit about it online. It was called Talking Therapies in the UK, and then when we moved to Denmark it was Balder Therapies, because my dad had like an intense interest in Vikings and like Danish mythology and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it was a pure special interest. It was absolutely a special interest. So that was what he named his business after. And it was doing hypnotherapy and Reiki and Hopi handling and things that I've mentioned before, unless you're new, in which case, hi, oh my god. So that was what he was doing, and it's very, very clear to me now that my parents were depressed as fuck. I think they were both like, I have a lot of debates about my mother, and we're not going to really talk about her in this video, but it was very clear to me like now that my dad experienced a lot of autistic burnout and was in burnout for like a lot of my life that I knew him. You know, and it's the early days of the internet and everything. He spent a lot of time just like Googling random crap and just sitting in his study. So at some point he will have come across like Reiki and hypnotherapy and everything and been like, oh shit, finally something that'll help me. Finally something that'll work. And I don't want to debate how much it works or if it's real or whatever else, because like a lot of people believe in it and find that it helps, and I'm not going to shit on that. And my dad and my mum were people that thought that it really, really helped. They really believed that Reiki helped like cure their physical pain. They really thought that meditation and hypnotherapy were helping to like enlighten them and make them better people and make them able to like do anything. You know, it was a very weird thing to grow up around, honestly. But my dad got super into like crystals and everything. Like he was like we had so many crystals around the house because my parents were like, if we have this rose quartz, the marriage won't collapse, and if we have this other crystal, then the kids won't die. It's kind of easy to see where my anxiety came from now. But like, they never talked about being anxious about these things, or at least my dad didn't really. My mum did sometimes, but my dad didn't really talk about being anxious about things. He just talked about the things that he was preventing by doing such and such. And you know, to me as an autistic adult now who's done a lot of research into autism and how my brain works and the like, I really think that he was having the same like type of pattern recognition I do, where he was like, oh, this and this has gone wrong before, so if I do this time, then it won't go wrong. Because he's got the pattern recognition, he thinks he's got it down, and then it'd go wrong again, so the burnout would kick in again. And my dad's burnout was intense for us as a family. Like I said in the last video, he basically just sat and played mahjong for years. Years. And this is where it's going to get kind of dark and deep. I did talk to someone in the comments about this, and it's what I'm going into, so like trigger warning for dads dying and not looking after themselves and general lack of self-care and the like. Because that was what my dad's depression tended to be. That was what his burnout tended to be. We always called it his depression, but like it wasn't. And for the majority of my life, it was all right because my mum was there. So like my dad's not getting out of bed, or if he is getting out of bed, it's just to go and sit in the study. But it's all right because my mum will make him his Weetabix, and she'll make him his lunch, and she'll make him his tea, and she'll bring him some snacks, and she'll be like, oh, you need to go and shower now. So it was like kind of okay. You know, it sucked to be a kid with a dad that just sits in his office in the dark and like doesn't spend time with you and doesn't engage in any of your interests or listen to you. Like, I really wanted to have a relationship with my dad, so I'd go and sit with him and I'd tell him about my day, and I'd be like halfway through the whole story when he'd sort of look up and be like, oh, and I'd be like, fuck, he's not listening to a fucking word. Like he was sort of aware I was here, but he's just become aware that I was here and engaging, you know? And as much as I get it, and I've totally done the same to people, it's heartbreaking as a child to experience that from your dad. It's fucking horrible. But that was just sort of how it was. I didn't really think about the fact that other people didn't experience that from their parents. It was just very much like, that's how dad is. But then we get to the dark nitty gritty of it all, which is when I was 16, my parents, like, they didn't officially break up. They were never going to get a divorce or anything, but my dad, like, their relationship wasn't working and no one was happy. So my dad decided to move out, and it was very much his decision. Like, my mum would have just carried on looking after him and taking on way too much of a workload and everything, because she was of the era where, like, you get married and you love them and you do what they need you to. And my dad decided to move out. And after he died, we found out that he like sort of kind of knew that he was gonna die fairly soon. And we have often thought that like he did it to try and make it easier on my mum and easier on like me by sort of isolating himself a bit and just not being around, you know? But at this point, my relationship with my mum was like increasingly very strained. So I moved out with him. And it was an absolute disaster. I only spent, I think, like 6 months living with my dad, and it was just a nightmare because I was very, very, very depressed anyway. I'd recently gotten a boyfriend who was far too old for me, and he should have known better and not groomed me as a 16-year-old. So he was staying over constantly. My dad was there all the time, barely left the house, and when he did, it was to buy... This is like the major like autistic burnout thing for me, is he would buy the cheapest Diet Coke possible, which wasn't a budget thing. He had the money to buy like a Diet Coke, but he preferred the cheapest possible Diet Coke, Rustler burgers and Danish pastries. That was all he ate. The same Rustler burger every day. Like when you opened his fridge, he had just like a week and a half supply of Rustler burgers, a load of pastries and the Coke in the door, and that was his diet. That was what he ate. That was the lot of it. So as a 16-year-old, I was having to be like, Dad, can we go to the shop, please? Because we don't have any food in and I don't have anything to eat. And he'd be like, what do you mean you don't have anything to eat? And I'd be like, there's only Rustler burgers in the fridge. Like, there is nothing here for me to eat. I'm a vegetarian. And then he'd take me to Asda and we'd do a big shop and he'd be like, I didn't think about that, I'm so sorry. And I'd be like, okay, you know? And he didn't tidy up after himself at all, because he'd been in like a 30-year relationship where my mum did everything. So like, man was having to learn how to wash his clothes again. It was obviously a very nightmarish, difficult time for my dad. And I struggle to care because it was fucking horrible to go through for me. And he was the parent and he should have fucking done better, you know? And as much as I can rationalise and be like, I get it, I understand it, he still realistically should have done better, because that was really traumatic for me to deal with. So 6 months of living like that, I was like, I'm out. Like, I cannot do this. I've got my older boyfriend. We can move out. Let's get our own flat. I'm already having to like act as someone's mother. It may as well be to this random man instead of my dad. And my dad was the type of person who, like, he was a really good person, don't get me wrong, but nothing was ever his fault, you know? He was just one of those people. So when I moved out and he was like, why are you moving out? And I was like, because it's disgusting living here. You're not washing, you're not cleaning up after yourself. There's just piles and piles of bed sheets, combined with the fact that he was diabetic. He wasn't looking after himself at all. Like, he wasn't a well man. And I just did not have like the mental, physical, emotional capacity to care for Mrs. 16-year-old. Like, you can think it's shitty all you want. People love this idea of like, but you're supposed to look after your parents. No, I'm not. I'm my own person. It's not on me to care for someone that needs medical intervention. But, you know, I did what I could. I'd go over like once a week and like make him some poached eggs so that he had something that wasn't a fucking Rustler burger. And we'd have a chat and we'd talk things through. And I was trying really, really hard to repair my relationship with him and to like be able to have a relationship with him. And he was also really trying at that point. Purely, I think, because it'd been long enough in his burnout that he was starting to just naturally come out of it a little bit. You know, he'd completely changed his situation. He'd moved out. He'd left his partner of like many, many years. His daughter then moved out. I think it was all just quite a wake-up call of like, you're going to be very, very alone if you don't take note and actually acknowledge and engage with people at some point. And it sounds really mean. I know it sounds horrible, especially because he died, but it was just kind of too little too late for me, you know? Like, you can't just ignore me for the majority of my life and then when I'm like 17 be like, oh, actually, I would like to make up and be friends and have a relationship and be your dad. Because it's so weird for me, because he was there, you know? Like, so many people's stories about their dads, they weren't there for them. And I'm like, that's horrible, I'm sorry about that. But I also sort of like feel the same way, despite the fact that physically my dad was always there, you know? But mentally and emotionally, there was just nothing. And I'm not putting that on the autism, I'm putting that on the burnout. Like, I know there's the whole thing of like, autistic people don't care about people, autistic people don't have empathy. And like, my dad had a lot of empathy. Like, he specifically became a social worker in order to try and help people, you know, and the patience and like, love. I was like, no, I can't say that because it was a professional job. But he like genuinely really like fucking loved and cared about the people that he worked with, you know? He really wanted to like see them have the best lives that they could and really gave a shit. And I kind of think that's another indication of autism, because he probably saw a lot of himself in them. You know, there were people with quite severe disabilities, much more so than someone that's able to work like my dad was. But I think that there's also a lot of ways where like he could see himself and he understood them and he understood how their brains were working, even if they couldn't necessarily communicate or whatever, and even if it wasn't necessarily in the same way as his, you know. And his hypnotherapy and Reiki business, although I do think it was largely like he learned it to help himself, once he had found something that he felt helped him, he then wanted to share that with other people and spread it as much as he could and teach other people to do it and like pass on the experience. So it just kind of sucked all the more that my dad's out here every day trying to like give back to people, but gives nothing emotionally to me for years and years and years, and then suddenly really wants to. So I put a degree of effort in. I really loved my dad, I really cared about him, I really wanted a relationship, but I was a teenager and I was really resentful and I was very bitter and I was very traumatized and very like, I've just been launched into this adult world and been forced to realise that my childhood was actually pretty screwed up and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing out here. So to then have my dad be like, let me be a parent now that you don't need me, I was kind of like, yo, what the fuck? No. Like, do we have to do this now? It's a bit late. But I also didn't want to turn the chance away, you know? From just before when I turned 18 up until when he died in the April after I'd turned 18, I turned 18 in the March of 2015 and my dad died in April 2015. For like the 6 months up until that, he'd been in and out of hospital, and my dad didn't understand boundaries particularly well. So it became again like a really weird and traumatizing and difficult time for me, because he was very like, if he has a medical issue, it was okay to tell me about it regardless of what that medical issue was. And some of it was just unbearably awkward and just like not things that you should be telling your child, and especially your daughter when you're a man. Like, it was just, you know, traumatizing and horrible, and he just didn't understand that there should have been boundaries there. He just felt open to tell me anything because I was sort of like, I was definitely the person he saw the most, so I'd become like his confidant or whatever, and I was just like, I'm too young, I'm too close to you, like this is really, really difficult for me and I can't deal with it and it's a lot. And I didn't really know that you could cut someone off yet, so I didn't, and I'm glad about that now because he died so soon after, so that would have sucked. But he was like incredibly reluctant to ever phone ambulances and reluctant to actually go in and see the doctor, and when he actually bothered to go and see the doctor, he wouldn't actually do what they told him to. So like I mentioned, he had diabetes and he had like really terrible legs and was quite badly physically disabled and like found it difficult to walk. It was, I don't want to get into like fat phobia and bullshit, but he was also, you know, he was 6'8" and very, very heavy. So that didn't help when you then have a bunch of like ulcers in your legs and feet and shit. So I was consistently calling ambulances for him, and he'd tell them not to come, and he'd tell them like, oh, I don't need you, and they'd be like, no, you really fucking do, buddy, you're coming into the hospital. And it was so frustrating. And again, I feel like this was where he was like really autistic, because he wouldn't let us know. I would just show up one day and like open the door and be like, he's not here. His car's outside, so he hasn't gone somewhere because he can't walk very far, but my dad's not here, and the house stinks and there's flies everywhere because he's just got months of dishes left out, or weeks of dishes, or however long it had been since I saw him. And I'd be like, oh shit, he's in hospital again, let's hope he's not fucking dead. And I'd phone the hospital and be like, is Henrik Anderson there? Because he always forgot his fucking mobile. He had it on a string and everything. He always either forgot the phone or forgot the charger, so you couldn't get hold of him anyway. So I'd have to phone up the hospital and be like, is my dad there? And then I'd chat with him and he'd be like, I'm fine, I don't know why they brought me here. And I'd be like, what's going on? You're in and out of hospital all the time, something's clearly happening here. And he just never ever told me. He was always like, no, I'm fine, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing. Until eventually he's in hospital and I'm like, it'll be fine, my dad's always coming in and out of hospital. And then I got a phone call at Starbucks that my dad was dead, and it was a whole time that we're not going to go into because it's not relevant to this. I've gone into it in a different video that I'll link here that's all about grief. It's a fun time. But yeah, so that's sort of the end of the story about my dad, and he died. I'm sorry, it's been 8 years and I have a very dark sense of humour, and I'm a very laugh or I'll cry kind of person. I know it seems grim to be like, oh, my dad died, ha ha ha, but like, you gotta deal somehow, and this is how I deal, you know? So officially my dad died. See, we're straight back fucking. So officially my dad died of pneumonia and alcoholic liver, and a heart attack that was like brought on by the pneumonia and the alcoholic liver. We all as a family argued with the hospital that it wasn't an alcoholic liver because my dad rarely ever drank. Like, I think I saw my dad drink like twice, and it wasn't even to a point of being drunk in like my entire life, you know, like my dad didn't drink. And they were very like, well, you don't know that. And I was like, my dad's never been drunk. I've cleaned his house like multiple hundreds of thousands of times, and there's never been like a single beer can. Like my dad's not, that's not it. And having thought about it and since processed the situation, I think it came from his fucking horrific diet. But I also think his diet was predominantly like, it was safe foods. He was eating his fucking safe foods, so I get that. And I do a very similar thing with foods that probably aren't all that much healthier, so that's concerning. You know, but I think that's again probably a reasonably common autistic experience, that like autistic parents don't managed to look after themselves. And you know, I know it sounds like really horrible to say, but my dad's death was basically his own fault. And I don't mean that in like a it doesn't matter or it makes it better or easier or like in any sort of like blameful way of him. Just in like the fact of the matter was it was his own fault. Like, he didn't look after himself, and this is what it came to. And that sucks, and it's a lesson to be learned to look after myself better, I guess. That's, yeah, you've got to take what you can from it. But it's tough and it's hard, and you know, I kind of like, not to make this super fucking dark, but I think that's kind of the thing that's likely to happen when autistic people but I think that, you know, not to make it super dark again and make it super horrible, but I think that's kind of what's going to happen when autistic people need support and it's not given. You know, when anyone needs support and it's not given, it's not going to turn out brilliantly. But especially for an undiagnosed autistic person to be consistently told like, oh, you're just depressed, or it's just this, or it's just this, or just do that, and have just decades of things not getting better, you know, like, it's fucked up. And my dad deserved a lot more support. He deserved a lot more. He deserved more empathy from me. He deserved more compassion and understanding from me. But I was also, you know, for the most of it, for all of it, a child and a teenager. So, because I've had some like slightly shitty comments, okay? And it's not from like my regular commenters, because you guys are chill. But I've had a few crappy comments that are like, well, you should have been better for your dad, and your dad needed you, and blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, I needed a fucking dad. I was a child. I'm not taking that bollocks. I'm not taking that bullshit. I'm sorry, you're not blaming me. It was my dad's fault because he was the adult. Fuck with me, come at me, fight me. I'm not having that one. Most things I'm willing to be like, oh, we can just differ opinions. But like, nah, that was not my fault. That was not on me. You can get to fuck. But yeah, that's the video. I know it's a bit dark. I know it's a bit grim. I know it's a bit morbid. I know it's a bit... but I don't see the point in taboo subjects. I don't see the point in not talking about things if they're likely to like in some way help or comfort or assist someone. So that's what we're doing here. That's what we're going for. Because I think like, even if it's just the one person that I was talking about, like our dad's been in the comments, even if it's just you that enjoys this video or like this video or got something from it, like, that's worth it. I am finally gonna go and have a cuppa though. Yum. That's what I look forward to at the end of every video, but especially these dark ones. I'm like, oh, can't wait to just like decompress from that with a cuppa. So yeah, if you wanted to pay me, you can follow me on Patreon or become a YouTube member, and that'd be lovely because I'm a broke ass bitch, but there's never any pressure. And if you want to just donate the once rather than like pay me monthly, you can donate to me on Ko-fi, but obviously no pressure. I would like to pressure you to subscribe because that's free. Anyone can do that, because I can't donate money to fuckers either, even though I'd like to, even though I think the content's the best thing ever. So if you'd like to just subscribe, I'd love that. If you wanted to follow me on TikTok, I've been posting a lot of TikToks about being autistic and like parent stuff and all this kind of thing. And I'm really quite enjoying just like silly little short form jokes because I think I'm quite funny sometimes, but I can't be funny across like a long period of things because I start to be like, so when my dad died. So the fun stuff's on TikTok, and you can also follow me on like Twitter and Instagram, and I think that's it. I don't think I'm anywhere else. I have a Pinterest, but I don't post anything on there, so there'd be no point. I don't know what I'm telling you. Whoever you are and wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year, and I will see you again in a couple of days.